Clay, welcome back to the podcast. It's good to have you,
Oh
man.
my goodness, Carey. Thank you. I feel like it's been too long.
Well, it has been a while. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
I don't know when the last time it was that I had you on, but a lot has changed in the world. A lot has changed in your world. In
Yes.
fact, a big pivot for you last year, heading into this year. You actually became one of the 38%
That's right.
of pastors who were thinking about leaving full-time pastoring. I don't know whether you ever leave it though. Like, do you still think of yourself as a pastor? Because you left North Point Ministries.
I did.
After how many years? You started there when you were 4?
Yeah,
Or 5?
I wish.
Trying to remember.
It was 18 years that I had been there. So I was 20, 25, 26, somewhere around in there.
Wow.
No, 24. But yes, I struggle. I mean, your question, do you ever leave it? That is my struggle.
Uh-huh.
I found in me more of that belief that if you're called for life to be a pastor, and if you leave it, you're living in sin. Of course, I don't believe that, but I have found that in me. And so it's been
But you think now that you're living in sin, now that you're no longer the
Exactly.
campus pastor, lead pastor of a local church?
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, I know that I'm not, but I have found it in me, that feeling of like, is this okay that, that I'm not going to be doing anything for anyone for Easter or something like that, Is that okay?
Okay, that's a really good question. All right, because we have a lot of pastors listening, a lot of business leaders, obviously, but also probably our share of former pastors.
Yeah.
It's like if you search the internet, not that anybody would spend a minute doing this, and look at different bios, I'm sure you can find bios of me in the last 2 years, some of which call me a pastor, some of which call me a former pastor. It's like, I don't even know what I am. Am I a former pastor? Am I a pastor? I don't get it. I'm not like working at a church full time anymore. I'm not even on the active teaching roster. So what do? Well, I help people thrive and haven't lost my faith. In fact, it's growing. But I don't know. Once a pastor, always a pastor. It's a good thing. So just catch people up with the story.
Yeah.
Last year, you stepped off of the staff at North Point. And what happened?
Well,
tell me.
I do feel like a walking cliche in a way, because I feel like, you went through a pandemic. Everybody started reflecting on their job and their life and what they're doing, having all those existential questions of what am I here for, all that stuff. And then you resigned, which in a nutshell, that is what happened. But obviously, it's far more complicated.
But not on the inside. I know I'm a statistic, but
right.
I'm not a statistic, right?
I
Come on,
I am
guys, give me a
unique.
break.
I'm a snowflake. I'm the only one going through this. No. Yeah, so I mean, I worked for Andy Stanley for 18 years, as I mentioned, and he has been amazing to me. I mean, massive influence in my life and obviously loads of people's lives, but I had changed jobs numerous times. I led a couple of our campuses. Most recently, it was leading our Alpharetta campus called North Point, which is our original one. And then 2 years ago, moved to Buckhead into Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, to lead Buckhead Church. And I was professionally restless, which who hasn't been, right? I mean, everyone has experienced professional restlessness, but it was more pronounced than it had ever been before. And I started wondering, not is this job great, because it was genuinely my dream job, but is this job right for me? And I think that's the struggle that a lot of people have, that, loads of people have experienced what I had been experiencing. It's a great job, love it, but it's not right for me anymore. So I came to that conclusion. I looped my bosses in on it and said, hey, I think I need to do something different. And that's scary because I don't exactly know what. And they were gracious and kind and really helpful in the process. And through all that, I made the decision to resign. I called my dad like a month before to say, Dad, I'm really wrestling through this and I'm thinking I'm going to do something different. And he goes, do you know what you're going to do yet? I was like, not really. He goes, well, let me give you one piece of advice. Don't ever quit a job until you have a job, which isn't that fatherly advice? Which is
and what'd you say? Sorry, Dad.
I'm about to. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Now I remember it was a I don't know that you remember this or not, but I remember exactly where I was. I was on vacation on my boat, and you and I had a conversation as you were weighing the options. And it's a big decision because you thought, well, what am I going to do? As I say, I've been in ministry all my life. I have no actual skills.
Right.
So
Right.
what do you do?
Right.
I can't exactly dig ditches. I can't exactly repair cars. What do you do with your life? So what have you been doing the last, well, as we record this, 6-7 months?
Yeah. 2017 released this book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And that book has been a massive gift for me. And I hope it's been a gift for other people, but it's given me so many great opportunities to talk about leadership. And I've really found more and more that I really love doing that. I, of course, love talking about the gospel and love talking about Jesus, but I feel like leadership there's so much about it that is so spiritual. And so I've been doing a lot of preaching at churches on the weekend and then doing a lot of speaking about leadership with companies during the weekdays. And that's been thrilling. I mean, I've definitely felt, a little bit like a missionary might feel, of kind of dropping into a part of the world that I don't feel super comfortable in, but feeling like I've got this great opportunity to try to help people, encourage people. I try to, what I tell organizational leaders is, hey, you've got your organization to run, but I know you want your people to be better people. And I want to help them be better people. And when they become better people, they'll be better leaders. And when they're better leaders, they'll make you more money. They'll help your company grow even more. And so let me help take some of the load off of your plate in doing that. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of us are kind of reinventing ourselves and sort of creating opportunities where there aren't. What's been the best part of the move and the hardest part of the move?
The best part, so when you work right now, I'm working for myself, and I think as far as I can tell, that's what I'm going to do. But when you do that, you trade. It feels like a straight up trade, security for freedom. And when things are good and you have some work to do, that's a good trade. But for the first time ever, I've really started to feel that sense of anxiety of, oh no, what happens if I don't have work? So I would say that trade so far has been the best part. I mean, I've loved the freedom of it. I've gone to church with my family the last couple of weeks, which has been fabulous. I preached about 3 months straight on weekends, but the last couple of weeks, we just went to church together, and that's been great. We still go to Buckhead Church. The worst part, the pressure of what's next, the uncertainty of what's next, it's just, that is a hard thing when you just don't know. And I can talk about having faith in God to other people. I can talk about trusting God when you can't see. To other people, I can talk about Psalm 23, that he's the good shepherd and therefore I lack nothing. I can talk about that with other people, but it is a lot harder to apply. It never, that's something that I'm constantly having to apply. What does it look like for me to trust him that I don't have to see the whole picture on the other side? That's probably been the hardest part.
Well, you've always worked under the leadership of other people for the last, 16, 18 years, you said.
Yep.
Andy Stanley, right? You always kind of had his covering, and he was the senior pastor at North Point Ministries. What are some differences when you kind of report to yourself? Because there's a lot of leaders listening who do report to someone else now, and they're wondering, wonder what it would be like if I was my own boss. What's that been like the first? And I say that as somebody who's kind of always been my own boss. So I've got decades of that, knowing the ups and the downs. But what about for you, the baptism into that?
Well, I've spent a lot of time talking about self-leadership over the years, as you have too. At your best is really a lot of that is about self-leadership, about leading yourself.
Yeah, it
really
is
well.
Actually.
And
True.
That I've had to apply that more than ever. I've had to apply those principles of, hey, it's really impossible for someone to lead you if you're not willing to lead yourself. It's almost impossible for someone to lead you well if you're not putting yourself in a position where you are willing to do the things that it takes to become a person of influence, to become a person that is helping others. And so I would say that's one of the hardest parts, is just the self-discipline, the self-governance of leading yourself well, or leading myself well. I mean, secondly, the emotional toll of just, I used to think I wasn't cut out for it, because I told myself that for a long time, because I worked for a rather large organization. Oh, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm better in a big organization, all that stuff. I regret telling myself that, because I think I just was telling myself the truth about the situation that I was in, but I didn't actually know. So I was unsure whether or not I would be able to emotionally handle the uncertainty of not knowing where work is going to come from. And I would say, so far I'm handling it okay, but it is not easy. I do feel like you have to be cut from a certain cloth to be able to manage the anxiety of, I don't exactly know where. I think I know what I'm doing next month, but I don't exactly know what I'm doing in 3 or 4 months. And that's, that's not for everyone, for sure. And I'm still trying to figure out if it's for me.
That's a good way of describing the last 25 years of my life. It's like, I know what's happening next month. I don't know about 4 or 5 months down the road. I mean, generally, right? But you're right. You really don't know specifically. It's sort of over the edge. Okay. We're going to talk about your new book, The Aspiring Leader's Guide to the Future. We're going to talk about how leadership is changing. You make the case that it's changing. I agree. But because you've had all these years in the church, one of the questions I'm asking this year is, what about our current model of church is broken? And what is working? What are some flickers of hope? And I'm not asking you to critique North Point. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Andy like you do, but I'm talking about capital C church, the way a lot of us do church. What do you think is breaking or broken or moribund? And what do you think is starting to work or we should pay more attention to?
Carey, this is one of those areas where I have felt always so in sync with you. I feel like you and I share a lot of similar ideas we have over the years even. I remember when when we were 5 years ago or so trying to figure out online church, and does it count, and does it matter, and is it here to stay? And man, looking back on those conversations, I think we did a podcast on it on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. And, the way the world has changed in the last 2 years is just remarkable. We have compressed 10 years of change into 2 years. We were already moving this way, but here we are so comfortable with, let's just do that meeting on Zoom. I mean, I just got out of the car. I went to Costco with my father-in-law about 30 minutes ago, and he was telling me that he hasn't been in a store. He's 68. He said, I haven't been in a store in as long as I can remember. And he says, we only order on, Instacart or whatever the app would be that they use. I think it's Instacart that they use, but that's so different. I mean, they'd never done that 2 years ago, but COVID taught.
And he's 68.
He's 68. Yeah. And COVID forced him to learn how to do it. And now he's like, I don't ever see us going back to a store. He was even, I felt a little bit critiqued as he was looking at what we bought at Costco. He was like, you could have ordered all of that you could have just had it delivered, like, what are you even doing? So,
sure, Pops.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thanks for that. But that's just one small example of how the world has just advanced so rapidly. And of course I wanted to, that was my first thought when he said that was, and the same is true of church, right? I mean, that value of convenience is just the preeminent value. And we've got to figure out what to do with it. Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? And I don't even know if that's a good question. Is it a bad thing or a good thing? Because it just is a thing. It's a thing. It's a reality.
It's a thing.
That's right. So
to use one of Andy's phrases, did you find yourself as a leader? And I mean, when you think about campus pastor, you're not talking about 300 people. You're talking about thousands and thousands of people, which in most cases, in and of itself would be a mega church. But did you find yourself, having had the track record that you did, needing to manufacture energy in places you weren't manufacturing energy before? That's a phrase Andy has used, and I love that. I think about that all the time. Where are we manufacturing energy? And what we mean by that is, what used to be easy that now is just so much effort. And you're seeing diminished returns.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's just the natural progression of any larger organization. But I would say the place where I've constantly struggled to feel it, or where I feel like I need to manufacture energy, or I have felt even the organizational pressure to manufacture energy, is to try to talk people into being in the building. That is, I just got exhausted doing that. I also am so ready to admit it's better in the building. Of course it's better in the building. I spoke at a conference for 350 Taco Bell franchisees, and they did the whole conference virtually, and they normally do it in person. And they were trying to decide, should we do it next year virtually, or should we do it in person? And of course they're going, it's better in person. But Carey, I mean, do you want to know the cost difference virtually versus having the conference in person? I mean, I think they spent $15,000 on this virtual conference. They normally spend $500,000 on the in-person conference. And so is it worth it? Well, I don't know. It's so hard to know, is it worth it? And I know there's so much of that is not church, but so much of that does correlate to, that's what every congregant is weighing on Sunday morning. Not, is it better for me to go? Of course it would be better if I were there in person. Life is better when I'm in person. This would be better if you and I were in the same room, of course. But the fact that you can be in Canada and I can be sitting here in this southeastern part of the United States in Atlanta, and we can do this, I don't know that it would be worth it for us to get together. And so that's what every person is trying to weigh on Sunday morning when they wake up is, I know it's better, but is it worth it for me to go do that? And that's where we've got to, those conversations of, are we making it worth it for them? We've been having those conversations for years now.
Well, and what I sense, I'm glad you raised that. What I hear over and over again is pastors making theological points about why you have to be in person, why you have to be in the room. And I'm not going to quibble with in person. I think rooms have a role. I think small groups have a role. I think micro gatherings have a role. I think people need people. I'll argue that all day long. However, people have voted. They've been voting for a long time. It's like your 68-year-old father-in-law who's like, I don't know whether I ever have to go back to a store. I'm on Instacart. And it's like, okay, are we just writing you off then? Is that what we're doing? Because you won't come to my party. You won't come to my house. You won't come to my room. You don't count. Not sure that's the best strategy. Any innovations that you found? And this, by the way, is a bit of a wasteland right now, particularly in the church. I think businesses are innovating a lot faster than churches.
And schools.
But and schools are innovating a lot faster than churches. But any flickers of hope in the wider church or in your own experience that you're like, I would pay attention to this and turn up the dial on that?
That's such a hard question because I just don't know enough. I mean, that's the other part that I really I feel slightly guilty about is I have all this experience in the church world and now I've been out for about half a year and I'm like, it's crazy how outdated I already feel. I mean, I love what Judah Smith's doing with Church Home. I mean, I think that concept is the way of the future of basically saying, hey, we can create little micro churches. I think neighborhood churches, local in-person gatherings, making it really easy for people, as easy as possible at 400 or 500 people. I love that concept. I think, there's a church called Family Church in South Florida that I really like. They're really focused on neighborhood churches. And I think there's something about that in the future, but I am excited to see the openness that hopefully the last 2 years has created in us to be able to leverage technology and not just fight against technology, but we're going to have to invest in it. I mean, that's the biggest issue is, are we going to actually move money, move people, move talent, to give people the freedom and the space to be able to try and risk and give it a shot. I think it's Scott Cormode. I was just looking at my bookshelf of books. He wrote a book called The Innovative Church. And there's a line in the beginning of that book where he says, our church is calibrated for a world that no longer exists. And I think that is a really scary and a statement that we should be paying attention to, because I think it is. I think most of us are calibrated for a world that no longer exists. And the same is true for leadership. I mean, leaders are calibrated for a world that no longer exists, which is why the future of leadership is so important.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the book is called, for those of you who are watching, The Aspiring Leader's Guide to the Future. 9 Surprising Ways Leadership is Changing. I think we all know it's changing. And if you're not changing with it, you're in trouble. But I want to talk, you're pretty honest and open in the book about failure. And I think this is an almost quote. You say you probably had more failures in the last few years than normal, perhaps, than everything combined in the previous decade and a half of your leadership. So many leaders, Clay, are afraid to fail. Can you walk us through failure? What's that look like in your life? And then what are you learning about failure?
Well, I had it when I was the lead pastor at North Point Community Church. I had 2, I think internally they were it was decided that they were failures. And that's where I feel like I really struggled the most with becoming risk averse. But we started a young adult service. We put a ton of energy into it. And, after a couple of years, we had a couple of 100 people attending, which in most worlds would be wonderful, but
success.
Exactly. Yeah. But at North Point, the first service had 1,000 people there. Having a couple 100 people after a couple of years, just eventually my bosses were like, hey, we can't keep doing this. That was a huge, that was a tough pill to swallow, so to speak, for me. And then secondly, I created a little skunkworks team to try to figure out all this digital stuff. We called it North Point Go, NP Go, trying to really understand what would it look like for us to help people who were unknown. They were just watching. How do we help them raise their hand and become known? And then how do we help them go from known to actually engaged wherever they are? Do we have a structure? Do we have a strategy? Do we have a system that would enable them to do that? And, I think I never really got total honesty from my bosses about it, but the feeling I got was that they were a little frustrated with me that I wasn't focused more on in-person attendance, which is totally understandable. That they would want to be focused on in-person attendance. And eventually they kind of moved it to another department and took it out from under me. And that was it was a punch to the gut. That was a hard thing for me. It felt like a failure. And I would say those 2 instances, it just did something in me that I found over the next year that I thought, oh no, this isn't going to work long-term in the future for me as a leader, not just for me here, but the leader of the future is going to have to be willing to try and fail and see their failures as learnings and growth and expensive lessons. That statement, what do you get when you don't get what you want? You get experience, which is a really good thing, but it's hard because, none of us want experience. We want successful experience. But learning, you have to be willing to, because of how quickly the world's changing, how rapidly it's changing, and how we're constantly stuck in this state of being in the video gaming world, they call it a noob. You're new to the game. You're kind of a rookie. We're going to be stuck in the noob state for the next however many years because things change so rapidly, so fast. So yeah, I just think that fear of failure is, we have to pay attention to it as we look toward the future.
You say it made you risk averse. And I think a lot of leaders have had that. And it's pretty easy, particularly as you get older, to be in the, hey, we tried that before, or, ooh, I'm not going to put it all on the line again. How are you fighting that battle internally, Clay?
Well, helping, understanding it has been has been helpful for me. Speaking to the fear, being able to describe the fear. I use this little, I call it a feararchy, but it's a hierarchy of fear. And I really connect it to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs helped me understand it. But at the very basic level, he says food, shelter, clothing, right? I mean, that's where we were as a society at one point. We're not there anymore. Now we're all the way at the self-actualization level at the very top of the hierarchy, asking all those questions. Am I fulfilled? Do I like my job? There was a day where did you like your job? I don't know. I'm not going to ask.
Irrelevant question. It's like, you have a job.
Do you have a job? Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. You're going to eat.
That's
You're going to live indoors. Like, be thankful.
But I love that we're there. I love that people are asking, does this job fulfill me? Does it make me happy? Does it give me a purpose? Does it allow me to find community? There's a hierarchy of fear as well. At the very basic level, you've got death. But what is that Seinfeld little bit that he has where he says, it was discovered last year that the top two reasons of the top two fears in America, or in the world or in corporate world or whatever, number one is death. Number two is death, surprisingly, and number one is speaking in public, which means that if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy at the funeral. That's his big punchline, But there's so much insight into that. That is fascinating that people are more afraid of speaking in public than death. Well, why is that? Well, because death is at the very bottom of the fear hierarchy. Above that is the loss of autonomy. Above that is the loss of relationship. And then at the very top is, I think, why speaking in public is such a significant fear for people. But it's the fear of being humiliated, the fear of embarrassment. I would rather, you hear people say, I would rather die than go through that again or stand in front of these people and do whatever. And really understanding that, that the reason why those two experiences that I had that marked me so deeply, they made me feel embarrassed. They made me feel humiliated. But then you've got to get under that and talk to yourself, right? Or let God talk to you and say, okay, well, why? Why does that humiliate you? What does that say about you? First of all, is it true that it was a failure? And then number two, what kind of actions does that cause you to take because you believe that? And could you be believing something that's not actually true? So all of that introspection just helped me so much. And it gave me the perspective, I would say, to go, you know what? I'm not going to let that mark me. I mean, of course it's going to mark me, but I'm not going to let it paralyze me. That I'm still got to be willing to step out there and take risks and try things.
How is fear of failure one of the aspects, behind the changing nature of leadership, or is it not? Is that just like an incidental along the way? Do you think failure and fear of failure is part of the changing landscape of leadership?
Yeah, one of the big, I don't know, the way the book was orchestrated or the way it was outlined was I give 9 surprising ways leadership is changing. And each one, the intention was that each one would stand on its own by itself. But of course, I would imagine, my hope would be if somebody sat down and read through the whole thing, they would catch some themes, catch some general changes that are happening. One of the most significant changes about the future, Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired magazine, there's a big excerpt that I use from him that is, he wrote a book called Irresistible, 12 of the most significant technological shifts that we need to pay attention to. And one of them is this idea that things are changing so rapidly. So, you have a software that you haven't used in a while. You open it up, you're like, where's my, a great instance is, just before this, you said, hey, would you record this on GarageBand? I've done stuff in GarageBand, but it's been a month or two. And when I open it back up, excuse me, I think what I experienced, thank you. I was like, where'd the menu go? Where'd my button go? It had changed since the last time I'd used it. I mean, the technology is
How
advancing.
dare you update that software?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You didn't even ask my permission or give me a notification that you were doing that. Obviously, that would have been annoying had they have done that. But that's the way life is working right now. The way apps are being updated, the way software is being updated, the way information is being created, the way that the technology that's going to affect the next year, we might not even know about it right now. We might not even be using it right now. I just installed a smart thermostat in my house. I mean, the examples are endless of the ways that it's constantly changing. And all of those changes keep us in this position where we have to be willing to say, I don't know. And and that's scary. I mean, leaders don't like saying, I don't know. We all have this sense of what a leader is and who a leader should be. And it's somebody who's competent, somebody who's confident. And asking the question, I don't know, or admitting I don't know it's awful for leaders. But the future leader has to be able to say it. The future leader has to be willing to try things and fail at things quickly and often and learn from them or else you won't be able to. I think you could get more prepared in the past. I think you could study more, learn more, and then be ready to step out. But the time you spend studying and learning, it's already changed by the time you're stepping out. And that's just different than it was in the past. I mean, I wrote a dissertation on the topic of helping people grow spiritually online. I think it got published in 2014. I mean, I can't imagine how worthless it is right now, because it's just so different today than it was then, and it's going to be even more different in the future.
No, that's a really good point. I want to talk about some myths that are no longer true about leadership. Either maybe they were never true, or definitely, hey, as of right now, they're not true anymore. What are some myths about great leadership that just don't hold water any longer?
Well, I'll carefully wade into this one since you used the water metaphor. But I use the line from Jim Collins in Good to Great, which, I mean, incredible book. Yeah. I mean, absolute in the Hall of Fame of leadership books. It's on my bookshelves. I'm sure it's on everyone's bookshelf. And he uses that phrase that before you start worrying about the what, you got to worry about the who, that you got to figure out who's on the bus. You got to get the right people on the bus. I think that concept of getting the right people on the bus is dangerous for the future. I think we have to really pay attention to what do we mean by that, because the word right needs to be defined. What do we mean by right? Because too often, right has been like me. Because we're all prone to assert greater potential to people who look like us and have educational background like us or experience like us, because it strokes our own ego. It makes us feel good about ourselves. I mean, it's really a form of loving ourselves well, and we have to pay attention to that, because I don't know that that's going to be what's right in the future. I think in the future, I mean, our world, just the data of the way diversity is increasing in our future. I think I don't know how it is in Canada. It's probably pretty different in Canada, but in America, within the next 20 years, white people are going to be the minority. And that is
very similar here.
Significant in big cities like Toronto, where close to where you are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, that is so different than the world of the past. And I know it makes us all fearful to talk about it. And it makes a lot of people fearful to talk about it because of the unknown. We just think, well, I don't even know what does that mean. And I'm just going to worry about just getting the best people. And I'm not going to worry about all that. I'm just going to, which unfortunately, oftentimes getting the best people or getting the right people on the bus.
It's just people who look like me and think like me and went to the same school and hang out in the same social circles. No, you're right.
I think that myth is a myth that we need to deal with.
So from the perspective of diversity and even different thinking, intellectual diversity, not just racial diversity and that kind of thing, but just people who think differently than we do. Do you think that's related to the pace of change?
I hadn't thought about that. Do you see that? This is where I'm like, oh my gosh,
it seemed to be a logical connection in my mind, Clay, because if you think about it, I thought a really good insight was we don't have time to prepare as much because, look back at Christmas, everybody was prepared with their plans. And then this thing nobody had heard of, in November, Omicron shows up and throws a grenade into the world. And people are canceling flights and cruises and get-togethers and putting masks back on. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, nobody can plan for that. Like, you just can't. And global pandemic aside, the political instability we felt and so sort of that long, steady gaze in a particular direction that a leader would bring from your own perspective, that had a shelf life, right? I wrote this post years ago called The Theory of the 10-Year Run, that most bands really have about a decade of top hits in them. Now, the Rolling Stones have been going for, gosh, I don't know, 55 years, 60 years. Wow. I don't know, a long time. Before I was born, they were making hits. And, they're still on tour. But if you look at their hits, they all happen in about a 10 to 15 year window. And that's it. So there's still, you go there, everybody wants to hear Satisfaction or Beast of Burden or something like that. But it's a very narrow window. And Start Me Up was the last one, really, one of the last ones. And so there's this cycle, this shelf life for creativity and sort of your run, where you're starting, you're in breakthrough, then you figure it out, you perfect it, and then you start to plane out. You either reinvent yourself or go to obscurity. It's a variation of the sigmoid curve. So yeah, but you're right. We don't have a lot of time to prepare, and algorithms can change your online presence in a heartbeat overnight. And now we got the metaverse and a bunch of other stuff to think about. So what are some other myths about leadership?
I would say that, and that doesn't excuse us from preparing. I would say we still should prepare, but that idea of agility, of being able to adapt and be flexible, I think that skill is going to be needed greater. I mean, I was talking to a guy,
I agree,
last week who's he's about to be a new dad, and I started asking him about. I was like, look at us, two fathers talking about feeding schedules. But I was like, are y'all going to demand feed or are you going to schedule feed? That's a significant question when you're having your first baby. And he said, oh, we are actually just talking about that. I think we're going to schedule feed. And he was like, but does it even matter? I mean, we don't even know what we're doing. It feels like it's all going to fall apart at some point. And I'm like, you're totally right. It doesn't really matter in the sense that you're going to have moments where you're like, we have no clue what you're doing. You cannot get prepared for that. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to be prepared for it. And I'm not saying that you don't agree with that. I hear what you're saying. You do agree with that as well. But I think the reason why that's important is because you can have a plan for the future, and you should have a plan for the future, but the ability to be open-handed, the ability to adapt, the ability to be agile and be flexible is going to be greater. That need is going to be greater in the future than it has been in the past, for sure.
And a diverse table around you is going to help you seize those opportunities faster. Yeah, I do think most people would agree that the 5-year plan is dead.
Yes.
Maybe you have a 5-month plan or 1-year plan, but the 5. Okay. What about some other changes? Go ahead and keep going if you want.
Well, I just was going to say that during the pandemic, I heard someone say, during the pandemic, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, but someone said, there's now only 3 work days. And I was like, 3 work days? What do you mean? Like, what kind of job do you have? I'm having like 7 work days. And they say, yeah, there's only 3 work days. There's yesterday, there's today, and tomorrow. I don't remember what we did a month ago. I have no clue where we're going to be in another month. And that is exactly what you're saying, that it is changing so rapidly, we just can't prepare. And the diverse set of eyes and opinions and experiences around the table is a way to be more agile, because you can pivot more quickly when you've got someone who's saying, hey, here's the way I see it, or here's what I understood from the way I grew up, or here's my experience. So I do think I have not seen those two connected before until this moment. Can I give you one? Can I give you one more that I mean,
please.
I think the idea of conflict is one of those skills that, of course, we needed it in the past, but we're going to need it even more in the future. You think about the things that we're talking about at work and not even at work, like in the first interview of a job, people are bringing up, hey, so tell me how your company handled the murder of George Floyd.
Right.
And you're like, I don't even know you, and we're talking about racial reconciliation. I mean, that would have come like years, or if ever at all. I mean, that would have been one of those, you don't talk about religion at the table. I mean, now we're talking about sexual orientation, gender identity. We're talking about all kinds of complicated, complex issues at work, and you might not agree with the person that you're working with. I would say on top of that, the social media, helicopter parenting, we're becoming as a society less able to have difficult conversations than we've ever been before. Yeah. And I think this is an area where, number one, the future of leadership is calling for a leader to become more adept at having hard conversations. And as a society, we're becoming worse at doing it, which is why I think it's so important for leaders who are trying to develop into the kind of leader that the future is demanding. They're going to have to figure out, well, how do I get better at having hard conversations? Because I'm having to have more of them, and they're becoming even more important.
Yeah, so that's a great question. How do you do that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Carey. I don't know. I do know. I would say it's hard, I should say. It starts with empathy. It starts with really understanding what the other person's feeling. I saw the principal of our kid's school do this. I went to lunch with him a couple of months ago, and I told him I don't want anything. I just want to tell you we love the school and we're for you. And he was like, whoa, man, I didn't know what you wanted. Thank you. That's wonderful. Now we can just have a nice lunch. And I was like, so everybody's mad right now? He's like, oh, everybody's mad right now. Everybody's mad about something. And he said that's the difference between 2021 and 2020. When we had lunch at the end of 2021, he said the difference is in 2020, everybody was like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's fight this together. We got to have each other. Let's unify. 2021 was like, we're sick of this. Like, I'm just going to be mean. I mean, I saw a person on this, at McDonald's the other day who jumped in through the window and like tried to get in a fight with the kitchen staff because they didn't get his order right. I mean, we're seeing people on flights like doing ridiculous stuff to flight attendants, and they're just angry. They're just like, I'm tired of it. I'm done, And he said, what I've learned is when I'm talking to somebody who's hot under the collar, he said, I really put myself in their shoes and I've thought, there's some reasons why they're extra upset right now. Number one, it's their money at work. You're always more into it when it's your own money, and it's your taxpayer money or private school money or whatever. Number two, when it's your child, of course, you love this person more than anything else, anyone else. And then number three, you're talking about an experience in which you have experience in the same area. I mean, everybody went to school. So you have your own school experience at the very least to compare it to. And so of course, but I thought that empathy to be able to walk into that conversation with that is so helpful. And it allows you to go, you know what? I'm going to calm myself down. I'm going to have a little bit more patience. But in the book I outline, here's four A's, a 4-step process to affirm what's true, affirm your intentions, to ask some curious questions, to acknowledge what you've heard, and then to advise, to bring your advice at that point. Most people work backwards through that process. We throw out the advice first, rip off the text, you better, how dare you? And then you end up having to acknowledge you're wrong, ask for forgiveness, and affirm that you still enjoy your job. So you're going to go through the process one way or the other. You may as well prepare for it and then go through it. Affirm, ask, acknowledge, and then advise.
Even the goats will have a coach. So if you're the greatest of all time, you're going to have a coach. And you're right. There is a sense at which, and I'm a bit older than you, where you have the thought, at least in the back of your mind, it's like, okay, I should have this figured out by now. And then you realize, I don't have this figured out by now. The goats will have a coach. That's a trend you see in leadership.
Well, the trend that I see that I'm most excited about, and I'll be curious your perspective on this because you have kids that are emerging adults, is I see a lot of reverse mentoring, which I think is fabulous. I mean, but the concept is basically the future is so unclear. It's so hazy. It's so foggy. You cannot see it. That statement, what you don't know won't hurt you. Dumbest statement of all time. What you don't know, of course, will hurt you. It has hurt you. It is hurting you now, and it will certainly hurt you in the future, but you don't have to not know. You can get someone further down the road. Or in what we're seeing in so many cases, we're seeing people go, hey, you're 25, you're 30, you see in a way that I don't see. Help me see. I had a young guy on our staff at Buckhead Church that he helped me see the racial tension in Atlanta in a way that I would never have been able to see it. And it was such a gift. And so I hope that trend continues where it's not just get a coach, meaning get someone who has gray hair, who's down the road has a bunch of wisdom, which might be the case, but it's also the idea of get someone who's maybe can translate culture in a way that would help you understand it. I assume your kids help you do that? Oh,
all the time. I mean, personally, and then my youngest one, Sam, works in my company. And I would be very concerned if it was a whole bunch of people in their 50s, not because of ageism or anything like that. It's just like, hey, we all grew up in the same time, same era. We tend to see things the same way. And to that diversity that you talked about, which I wholeheartedly agree with, it's generational diversity. I mean, I learn so much from young leaders. And it's ironic. People, the people who listen to this platform, this podcast, the people who access my website. I was doing Google Analytics the other day. Number one age group, 25 to 34.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, 25. You wanted to guess?
I wanted to guess, but that's really encouraging.
Go ahead and guess.
Well, I would have guessed, I probably would have said late 30s would have been that would have been my guess for number one, but it's amazing that 25 to 34. And what percentage?
It's like it breaks into, there's 5 or 6 that break it down. So I'm going to say 20%.
Okay.
Then the next, like right next to it, is
50 and
35 to 44-year-olds.
Oh, okay, good.
Nope.
All right.
35 to 44. You know what number 3 is now? Again, in the double digits.
I'm going to stop guessing.
18 to 24.
No way.
18 to 24.
I
Then
never
comes
guessed
45 to 54, and then 65 and over.
The boomers.
So it's predominantly young leaders, and I'm barely Gen X. Thank you, 1965. Most categories would put me into the Gen X. Some would say I'm a boomer. My kids say I'm a boomer. But, and I think that is diversity of opinion, getting younger leaders around the table and trying to stay current. And, at a point I thought, oh, that's a really good practice. Now I'm like, no, I need that. Like I just don't see it accurately. I just don't.
What do you say to people, Carey, when they say, hey, I gotta, especially if I'm speaking in front of people, if I'm leading people of diverse ages, I mean, that's amazing that you've been able to stay so young. What do you tell people? What do you attribute that to? What's the advice you give?
Just young leaders. Just stay near someone. I mean, a lot of my friends are similar stage, but we have friends who are younger. And then I definitely make sure that I spend a regular amount of time listening to younger voices, paying attention, like in my own personal circle, making sure that I have people on my team, that I have people in my life who are younger. And then even, one of the really fun parts of parenting kids who are very much in their 20s and now 30s is I listen. I'm like, what do you see differently? And I take notes and I learn.
Your podcast, the episode you did with Kara Powell, I don't remember your numbers. Are you in the 500s now?
Yeah. Almost. Yeah, we're getting there.
Wow.
Me and Moses.
I related so deeply with what she said about how uncool she is. No matter what she says, the fact that she's saying it, it's immediately uncool. It's like as soon as it comes out of her mouth, it's expired already, But I feel like you do a great job of, and I wrote a chapter about vulnerability, about leaders learning how to lead with vulnerability, which is, I think, one of the most important traits of any leader of the future. And I feel like you do a great job of, you're hip and stylish and you look great wherever you show up, but I don't ever get the sense with you that you are trying to be something you're not, or that you're just in your lane. You're very comfortable in your own lane. And I would imagine that is attractive to the 25 to 30-year-old.
I hope that's true. It's taken a long time to get a little more secure. As our mutual friend Reggie Joyner says, we're all a little insecure. But, it's one of those things where for leaders listening, even on wardrobe, I will check in with people and say, because you don't want to be that guy who's pulling stuff out of your closet that's you've worn for the last 30 years. It's like, if you're some like really weird artist and can pull that off, great. I cannot do that. But on the other hand, you don't want to be the guy in his 50s who's trying to convince people he's in his 20s. Get a little bit closer. You'll see the wrinkles. Like there's lots of them, right? So, it's one of those things where in how I dress, the language that I use, in sort of all of that stuff, that is actually who I am. Like I am interested in new things. On the other hand, I also realize, I'm almost 57. I get it. So, and I think it's that comfort. If you're 40, actually your age is really interesting because I remember when you were the young gun, you would DJ the parties and that kind of thing. And
not anymore.
Scrog Dog, the whole deal. And now I'm
going to bed when the party's happening.
But I remember your 40s, early 40s. How old are you now, Clay? 41, yeah. I remember that, 41 to 45, 40 to 45 being I can still pull off the young leader. And if you're hanging out with 80-year-olds, you'll always be the young leader, which is fine. But the kids don't think you're young anymore. You're a middle-aged man with kids of your own. And you're like, now what do I do? Right? And so I think it's just getting comfortable in your own skin going, okay, I can't do that. And I'm not here. But maybe I get to speak into this.
I love it.
And so vulnerability, maybe is this an example of vulnerability? Just like, okay, here's how I actually try to process this stuff. Like just take people behind the scenes. That's what I try to do.
Yes.
Because I'm always interested in behind the scenes. That's why I want to know, how the last 6 months been for you? That's why I want to know, what are you seeing? What are you not seeing? Like, what else is involved in vulnerability?
Yes, and I think it's catching yourself in those moments when you're tempted to edit, when you're tempted to posture and say, "Hey, here's the best," and I'm going to hide the rest. It's resisting doing that and saying instead, "You know what? I'm going to let you see the fact that I don't have it all together, that I struggled with what to wear, or struggled with how to show up, or struggle with how to prepare for this." Angela Arendt's taught me a great lesson on this. She's a former CEO of Burberry, and then her last post was she was the senior VP of retail at Apple. You've interviewed her before?
No, I haven't, but I would love to.
You should have her.
All introductions appreciated, my friend.
Well, she is wonderful. And she, Tim Cook hired her away from Burberry. It was a huge move. And when she was stepping onto the executive leadership team at Apple, I believe she was the only woman at the time, only female on that team. So I can't imagine how intimidating it'd be to be on that team, period, but to be the only female on that team. And her first role was to unify the 70,000 retail employees at Apple. That can't be a hard job, right? And she said that she's
easy.
like, so I'm like, oh my goodness, how do I even do this? She said one of the first things she set out to do is I'm going to send out a quick video every Monday morning called 3 Points in 3 Minutes. It's real simple. Just here's what's on top of my head. Here's what I've been thinking about. And I'm just going to get it out to you. She said she's shooting one of the first ones she does, and her phone rings in the middle of it, and it's her daughter, who's a college student in London at the time. And she was like, I had to get the phone because I just didn't want to send my daughter a voicemail. She doesn't call all the time. I was really wanting to talk with her. Answer the phone. I said, hey, real quick, I'm in the middle of this video, but as soon as I'm done, I'm going to call you right back. Love you. Bye. She hangs up the phone. She gets right back into the video. They wrap it up. The crew's getting their stuff packed up. And she said, hey, when we send it out, I want to send it out just like that with the phone call in it. And the crew's like, hey, don't get crazy, Angela. We're Apple. We make beautiful things.
We're Apple. We can fix that.
we can edit that, We can
bring your AI in.
That's right.
Come on.
We created the software that can edit it. So anyway, and she says, no, send it out just like that. She said the next morning I woke up and I had hundreds of emails in my inbox from Apple retail associates telling me, thank you. Thank you for showing us, pulling back the curtain and showing us that you are a real person, that you're trying to be a great mom as well, that you feel the demands of everyday life like we do, and yet you're still trying to bring your very best to work, to do your life's greatest work. That's what we're trying to do as well. I just was so struck by how simple but how profound and how scary that had to be on her part to go, you know what? I'm intimidated. It's Apple. Everything's got to be perfect and great and shiny. And she's like, nope, I want it to be real. And so I would just say, I have a 30-year-old guy that helps me with social media. He's been tremendous on this kind of stuff because I'll be like, hey, he's like, hey, we need a video from you that says this, and whatever. And I'm like, hey, I'm at my daughter's soccer game right now. I'm not really at a place where I can shoot a video. He's like, no, do it just like that. Tell everyone, Or I'm like, hey, I got to be honest with you. I feel really insecure about doing that because I don't really know if I can talk about that. And he's like, just say it just like that. Say that you feel insecure talking about it and then go for it. And I just think that refusal to edit. Now, of course, there are times when we have to edit and there are times when we should edit the video. But I just think learning to live in a state where you're real. Hey, I'm not trying to be shiny and slick. I'm trying to be fully me and as passionate as I may still feel, but I'm trying to be fully me. I just think that is the future. That's the future of leadership.
I want to go deeper into that, and I don't know exactly where to. I mean, part of that is the MO of this podcast, right? From episode 1, I really haven't edited. I always give the guest editing rights. If something came out that you don't want, we'll cut it out. I think that's happened 5 times. So basically this is just the conversation. But I want it to feel like dinner. I want it to feel like lunch.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to feel like coffee. So
I was
we're kind of meandering.
About 10 minutes ago, I coughed. Will you edit that?
Yeah. No.
And see, that's probably an example where it's like, okay, well, if you're editing a cough, you're doing that for the listening pleasure, to make the experience better for the listener. But learning...
Well, we might edit it, but you know what? I said, bless you, and you said, okay, and I realized in my head that couldn't be a good edit. That would be a very difficult edit to make. So I don't know. Toby, what are you going to do? You going to edit that out or leave it in? If we have a technical malfunction,
Sure.
yes, I'm going to cut that out.
Sure.
Let's say we lose signal or your mic dies or something like that. Yeah, we're not going to make that an awkward hearing experience. But, I just, for the leader who's resisting vulnerability, okay, you know this and I know this. There's some leaders who in the name of vulnerability do their counseling session on the air. And
yeah, exactly.
I don't know that that's always helpful.
No.
And then there are other leaders who are like, I'm bulletproof. I got this all figured out.
Nothing's
Just
ever
follow
wrong.
me and your
Yep.
life will be perfect.
Exactly.
Nothing's ever wrong.
Yep.
Where's the line for leaders who are like, yeah, I need to be a little more vulnerable, or perhaps I'm like oversharing? Is there a line that you follow?
Well, I would say ask the people around you. I think you need to have some real honest mirrors in your life who will tell you, hey, you're probably less vulnerable than you used to be. I mean, we all know that the more famous you get, the more tempted you'll be to be less vulnerable. We typically don't get more vulnerable when we get more famous. We typically get less vulnerable, right? And that's what's oftentimes ironic is the vulnerability is the thing that drew people in. And now that they're in, you're feeling more of a need to show them that you've got it all together now. And so I would just say pay attention to that. I would say secondly, pay attention to it's I don't know how great it is to be vulnerable about things that are still in process. So I wouldn't suggest as a leader showing up to your meeting on Monday and saying, wow, it was a hard weekend. My wife moved out. I don't know if we're going to make it. That's probably a little too in the moment. I think
probably talk to your counselor and a few close friends about that one.
I think so.
And then
maybe
try
not
to
the
figure
team
out what
meeting.
your next steps are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that,
No, I think that's...
Oh, go ahead.
Go.
No, you go.
Well, I was going to say helpful. Helpful that's what I try to do. Will this help someone who hears it?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is yes, then I can probably share it. Or, let's say I am having a disagreement with my wife. She does listen to every episode. Thank you, Tony. You're a gem. But let's say I'm having I'm pretty sure.
That is remarkable.
It's been a long marriage.
I know
Good
my
one.
wife listens to every one of your episodes, but I didn't know that your wife does as well.
Thank you, Jenny. But if Tony and I have an open loop on something, for me to go and talk about that publicly is probably that's not the right time. Because I don't think I'm helping anybody. I'm certainly offending her or wronging her or whatever that is called. I'm doing it. And
that's a good outlier.
Let's talk. I got one more question because you've covered so much. Oh, yeah. How about this? Success doesn't have to be a scarce commodity. Because there is this sense and this constantly dynamic, being afraid to fail, getting, change happening so fast, being vulnerable. It almost feels like success is, you just can't be successful. And you're saying, no, that's not true. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. And I'm saying that we oftentimes think of success as there's this limited supply of it and I have to go get it. And once I get it, I've gotten something that other people might not get. And when someone else gets it, that now there's less of it for me to get. But we all know this to be true. I mean, research has shown us this over and over again. This is where the gospel really intersects with good, healthy leadership. The best kind of leader is the leader that is cheering for the success of others. The best kind of leader is the one that sees the other person's success as his own or her own success. That sees, hey, if you're not successful, I can't be successful. That, as a lot of times in a campfire, you think about the simple illustration of a campfire. We all go away and collect sticks, and then it provides warmth and community, and everybody's having a great conversation. Nobody's sitting there staring at the fire going, was that Carey's stick that lit or was that mine? Because I'm going to be so mad if it was Carey's and not mine, because that's really annoying. No, we don't do that. We're just like, who cares? Just put the stick in the fire, and if there's a great fire, wonderful. We're all better for it. That has got to be our mentality and our posture in the future. Of course, success is possible for every single one of us, but I think we have to see it completely connected to and correlated to the success of other people. Frank Blake on Tim Ferriss's podcast, I thought just told a awesome story about Jack Welch and Frank Blake was the former CEO of the Home Depot in Atlanta. We're really proud of that company. And he said every year, Jack Welch was his mentor. Jack Welch, famous GE CEO, wrote the book Straight from the Gut that I read when I was 20 years old, which made me realize that I wouldn't cut it in corporate America. And Jack Welch is a remarkable leader. And Frank said he'd go up there and every year and they talk about money, they talk about org chart, numbers, finances, whatever. He said down to the detail of like the cost of a product. He said it was so detailed, he couldn't believe it. He said, but the last time he went, he knew he was already retiring and he knew he was able to ask him anything. And so he asked him, hey, Jack, what is the greatest quality in a leader? And he said, it's generosity. And he said that just shocked him because he just was like, whoa, that's not what I thought. I thought strategic planning. I thought great communicator. I thought able to cast vision, able to execute. But the idea that generosity is the hallmark of great leaders, it is a little shocking. It's a little surprising to think, but it's what we all want in each other. It's what we all want in the other person, that I want to know that that person's in this for me and not in this for him or for her. And vice versa, or to flip that, I need to be the kind of leader that lets people know, hey, I'm in this for you. I'm not in this for me. And I just think the future is going to demand more of that than the past even did. And that's always been an important quality. It's going to be even more important as we look to the future.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you're getting into, not to be cliche, but abundance versus scarcity thinking, which I really believe, I'd say the early me was probably a little more scarcity. And certainly over the last 2 decades, it's been a lot of more of abundance. And your success does not have to come at anyone's expense. And neither does mine if I have any, right? We just have an abundant mentality. And I think that's very kingdom driven as well for those of us who are people of faith. Okay, Clay, book is called The Aspiring Leader's Guide to the Future. Comes out in January. So I think by the time this airs, it'll be out.
Wonderful.
Tell us where they can find you these days.
Well, Scroggins.com is my website, and I'm on social media, but I would just say, Carey, what you do, when I talk to you, you and I spoke on Instagram Live a couple weeks ago about this topic of the future of leadership. And I feel so humbled to get to talk to you about this, because I've told you this, your blog that you write at the beginning of every year, what are the trends we see? I've always seen you as this, you've got this ridiculously innate ability to predict the future and to see what's coming before it's coming, except for all the things that you wrote and didn't see it coming, that you did not see coming.
I'm missing the important things in life, but I catch all the trivial things, Clay.
Oh my gosh. That's my problem, Carey. Here I am, I'm in the middle of going, I really want to tell Carey how much he means to me. And I think of this stupid, funny connection with a book that he wrote called Didn't See It Coming, as I'm telling him about how well he sees stuff coming. So anyway, I genuinely mean that I'm so humbled talking to you about this, because so much of what you do is you see the future. And I know, you can't predict the future. You're not if you could, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now, for sure. But it's so important for us all to hang our own dartboard up on the wall of, where do I see this going? Because that Gretzky quote, don't skate to where the puck has been, skate to where the puck is going. We need to be developing into the kind of leader that the future is going to demand. And the only way to begin doing that is to put something up on the wall and say, I think this is where we're headed, and I'm going to start becoming that kind of leader. And you've been doing that for years, and so it's very intimidating to talk to you about this topic, but I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate you giving me a little bit of your limelight.
Well, I really appreciate you, Clay, and our friendship goes back a long time. I respect you as a leader. This is a great book. I had the privilege of reading an early copy to endorse it. And I think it is changing. And I know you probably wrote this with young leaders in mind, but I would suggest it's good for any stage of leader. And I think a lot of future planning is just connecting the dots. And you mentioned Seinfeld. That's one thing I've realized, because people say, how do you see the future, right? It's well, I don't know that I do. But if you notice what comedians are, is they're noticers. They notice things. Nate Bargatze, so many others, who you turned me on to, I think, for the first time years ago as a young comedian. And, comedians, they notice things that we miss.
Yep.
And the clues are there. And you've done a really good job of pulling the clues together. And I try to do that as well. So clayscroggins.com. Clay, thanks. I know this won't be the last time. Thank you so much, my friend.
Oh, loved it. Yep. Thanks, Carey.
Thanks for watching the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I hope today's episode has helped you thrive in life and leadership. If you haven't done it already, head on over to CareyNieuwhof.com, where millions of leaders access leadership insights, tips, and strategy. You can also sign up for my email list, where I send out an almost daily tip, just a short nugget on leadership insight and strategy, and I'd love to connect with you there. And now it's time for a generosity tip with Jim Shepard, who's the principal at Generis. This episode is brought to you by Generis, helping you create a thriving culture of generosity.
Hey, so in this generosity tip, continuing our series of those tips, I want to talk about a topic that's pretty popular in the church today: developing younger givers. The common perception, or can I say misperception, among pastors and church leaders is that millennials and Gen Z, younger givers, they just don't give. Look, here's what I can tell you. Millennials and Gen Z, the youngest of the young generations, they are givers. They want to be givers, and they just need a little help. Younger givers have tended to give less for a long time. So before we throw our younger givers into this category of, oh, Jim, you know how they are, they don't give. No, that's not true. If they're not giving at your church, then maybe that's an issue for your church. That's certainly not an issue for the church at large. There are churches that have cracked the code and they've figured this out. They truly want to be a part of helping you advance kingdom movement in your church. Help them figure out the generosity piece. It'll bless both of you. God bless you.